Can I grow rose seeds from hips that are either green or brown and mushy? Hey everyone, Jeff the Rose Dude here, and I'm answering a very common question when it comes to rose hips and seeds. But here's what most growers don't realize. You might be throwing away perfectly good rose seeds. Do green rose hips still have viable seeds? Can mushy brown hips still grow into seedlings? The answer is yes. Skipping out on these hips could mean missing out on some of your best roses. I've grown thousands of rose seedlings, and many of my strongest, most unique roses came from hips that looked wrong. And here's my unpopular but important opinion. You should be trying to germinate seeds that come from imperfect hips, even if you have ripe ones. Stick with me because I will show you exactly how to spot those hidden gem seeds so you don't waste a single opportunity to grow your own one-of-a-kind rose. Let's get to it. Now, before we get into green and brown rose hips, we need to first know what ripe hips look like. So after a flower has been pollinated, it takes about 3 to 4 months for the rose to grow and fully develop rose seeds. Now, most of your rose seeds should come from ripe rose hips, as those seeds are going to give you the highest germination rates. A ripe rose hip will have swollen, and it usually turns a bright orange or a red color. That's when you're going to know that the hip is ripe. It also can have a little bit of a fleshy feel to it when you squeeze it. It's not going to be rock hard, but it's not going to be super soft either. Now, when you're first starting out, you may not have a lot of ripe rose hips or any at all, but that shouldn't prevent you from going forward with the seeds that you do have. Now, my very first year, I was still learning, and I didn't get a whole lot of rose seeds from hips that were ripe. A lot of them were overripe, but I went ahead and tried these seeds that I did have, and I actually was really surprised at how many rose seedlings I did end up getting. But don't worry, next I'll show you why green and brown rose hips isn't going to be the end of the world for you. All right, so now we're talking about the green rose hips. They can be either really green or they could just start to turn the color, but both of these rose hips are underripe. The biggest problem that you're going to find with the underripe rose hips is that the seeds are not going to be fully developed. I have noticed that the seeds that are underdeveloped generally are the seeds that have the lowest germination rate, but you still can get seeds that germinate for you. Now, how do you determine which of these seeds are actually worth trying to grow? You're going to want to get the seeds out of the rose hip, and you're going to pay attention to the seeds that are still soft, if they are a lot smaller than the rest of the seeds, or if sometimes they can be a lot lighter in color than the other seeds. Those are the seeds that you'll just want to throw away. They are not going to grow for you. They are underdeveloped, right? So they're not going to be viable. Now, the rest of these seeds, you're going to want to perform what is called a float test. And that's where you take a cup, you fill it up with water, and you drop the seeds in the cup. Now, those seeds are going to do one of two things. They're either going to float or they're going to sink. The seeds that sink generally have a higher chance of germinating versus the seeds that float. But you do want to keep both sets of seeds. Just keep them separated and keep them labeled. And I will show you here in a little bit why you want to keep both sets of seeds. Next, we have the brown and mushy hips, and even sometimes they can be hard. These are a result of the hips just simply being left on the plant too long. You know, things happen in life and we forget and we don't get out in the garden to harvest the hips when they are ripe. It happens, right? But I have noticed that quite a few of the seeds from the overripe rose hips generally do have a fairly good germination rate. Not as good as a ripe rose hip, but you still can have a good chance of getting rose seeds to germinate and grow for you from these kind of hips. The biggest problem that rose seeds have that come from brown and overripe hips is that they could have started to rot. The rose hips can start getting moldy and will no longer be viable. So when you get the seeds out of these rose hips, you'll want to throw away any of the seeds that are soft or much darker than the rest of the seeds. You'll also want to perform a float test. There is one extra step that you should do with these seeds. Because there can be fungal and mold spores present on the seeds, you'll want to sanitize them. You don't want to keep those on the seeds because the next step is cold stratification, which I do have a video on, and I will post it at the end of this video. Make sure to watch that after this so you know what to do with your seeds after this step. So sanitizing the seeds is really easy. So you take hydrogen peroxide and you add it to the water while the seeds are still in there. And you don't need a lot of hydrogen peroxide. About a 10-to-1 ratio is really good. And you just let the seeds kind of sit in that solution for about 15 minutes. It is important to know though that after you add hydrogen peroxide to the water, the seeds that sank will start floating. Before you add the hydrogen peroxide to the water, get a second cup, fill it up with water, and transfer the seeds that float into that second cup. Because if you leave all of the seeds in the one cup and you add the hydrogen peroxide in there, the seeds that sink will have started to float, and then you won't know which seeds are which. All right, so now we're gonna talk about my unpopular opinion about why you want to try to grow seeds from unripe and ripe hips, the sinkers and the floaters. And the reason is because you're using that for data, right? You are going to want to grow roses from seed every year. It's such a fun hobby, and once you start doing it, you'll be absolutely hooked. So initially, especially at first, you want to kind of keep a record of all of the seeds that you get and how many of each group, seed group, that will grow. So I like to write down how many seeds I got from green hips, from ripe hips, from the brown hips, and how many floated and how many sank. And I write down after I get them cold stratified and I plant them and they start growing, I write down how many of each of the seeds actually ended up growing so I can figure out what the germination rate is between all of the seeds. And I do that for every single variety because every rose is genetically different, and some roses are naturally better seed parents than others. So I can look back from my past experiences to see which seeds are actually worth growing. So if I have seeds from a green rose hip this year and I noticed that I got no germination from the seeds that floated, then I know next year when I get green hips again, I can just throw away those seeds that floated because I know that they don't grow. Same thing goes with the brown hips. If I have no seeds that grew from any of my brown hips, then I don't have to spend extra time and effort on those hips again in the future. And that's going to set me up for better success. It's going to allow me to have more time to do whatever else in my life, or, the time that I spend on my roses, I can spend my time and effort on these seeds and roses that I know I have a better chance of growing. I can also compare all of the seeds that came from the imperfect rose hips. I can compare those to the seeds that came from the ripe rose hips. So then that way I can determine if it's even worth working with those types of seeds. If I have a really low germination rate, I can determine whether or not it's worth it to work with those seeds. So whether your rose hips are green, perfectly ripe, or even brown and mushy, the truth is this: you won't know their potential until you try. Every single rose seed that you grow will be a unique, one-of-a-kind rose that will never exist again. And that's the magic of growing roses from seed. And it is also so much fun. If this video helped you be more confident with rose hips and seed viability, hit that like button and drop a comment. I love being part of your own individual journey. And if you want more guides on growing roses from seed, rose hybridizing, and improving seed germination rates, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on the next video. Thank you so much for watching. And remember, every rose breeder started out with just a handful of seeds, a lot of interest, curiosity, and passion. Keep experimenting, keep learning, and keep making those one-of-a-kind roses.